the Monday after that, I walked into JP Morgan, which I took a lot of positives from, but also came at some cost. Just in the last 4-5 years, I've started Heroic Hearts, which is a charitable organisation.
It's kind of pushing the boundaries of the norms in the UK, changing people's perspectives from this psychedelic being people taking mushrooms on a park to actually it being a legitimate therapy.
You can approach psychedelics with a specific issue, and there's a high percentage chance that it will be significantly improved.
I think that is the scary bit. You've got no idea what it's going to uncover. Welcome to episode 7 of the Mission to Mission podcast. I'm Ben Reed, and this week we're going to be speaking to Keith Abraham. Nice to meet you, Keith.
Hi, thank you.
So a bit of a rundown of Keith. He was a Paratrooper. Lance Jack left in 2012, which probably feels like a lifetime ago.
It does.
But it goes quick. You moved into JP Morgan,
Yeah.
straight out of the military, which I see quite a few people doing. And then you moved out to doing your own thing, something very, very different.
Very different.
Do you want to give yourself a bit of an introduction?
Yeah, I was in 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment for nearly 9 years, between 2004 and 2012. I did Iraq, Afghanistan, SF selection, and then left. And I left I walked out of the gate on a Friday, and the next Monday, so not the immediate Monday, but the Monday after that, I walked into JP Morgan. A very highly paid job, a very high intensity job at JP Morgan, which I took a lot of positives from, but also came at some cost. And after that, I started setting up my own organisations, my own businesses, and haven't looked back since. So one of those, when I first left JP Morgan, I left to start my own Tai Chi and Qigong school. And just in the last 4-5 years, I've started Heroic Hearts, which is a charitable organisation.
And that's where I'd love to start. I mean, our conversation started because of Heroic Hearts. It's to me, it's kind of pushing the boundaries of the norms in the UK, I would say, and it's a super, super interesting subject. What inspired you to go into start a business, start a charity that focuses on trauma?
Well, firstly, I think that when we're talking about the wider subject of this podcast, the reason for this podcast's existence is I'm a big believer in that suffering is the catalyst, is probably the best catalyst for growth and positives. And Heroic Hearts, my decision to create Heroic Hearts was no different, came from suffering. My own, but also I'm pretty sure it was the summer of 2018, could have been 2019, but 2018, I think. In the summer, I was still on Facebook at that point, and there was this, there's a wider group for military welfare. I think they put out beacon alerts for missing veterans. And that summer there was 2 every week for 8 weeks, and they all died. All of these alerts that went out, no one came home. They all went missing and then were found dead. And I was just reading these alerts coming in, and then the fulfillment of that, which ultimately is a suicide. And I just thought, the traditional methods just don't work. Just for the vast majority of people, traditional methods for treating mental health don't work. And I believed that already because I had already had my experiences with using psychedelics. So I believed I had this potential pathway for people to use, right? Not that I had it, but that I'd experienced it and that I'd already had this idea. I thought, I could probably create an organisation that could help facilitate these experiences for veterans. So I'd already had that thought. And that sequence of events was the catalyst for you're going to do that now. You're going to build this organisation because this can't continue. This this is just ridiculous. That's just one summer. It's happening all the time. And I don't think in the UK, I don't think we measure in suicide rates, we don't measure whether that individual is a veteran or not. So there's no tally that there's no data that we can say, oh, there's this amount of veteran suicides. I think I'm right. I might be wrong with that, but at the time, I'm pretty sure that's correct, that we couldn't tally them up, but we knew that there was so many because we were just watching them roll in week after week, and that was my decision. So I've had enough of this. I'm going to start facilitating access to psychedelic therapies for veterans.
And how does that work? Like because I'm intrigued by this subject. So a bit of a backstory is I've got two close friends who have been through, a tough time post-military, mentally. People you'd never imagine. One of them more so, you'd never imagine would be somebody who would be suffering from something like that, to the point of like suicidal. So, how does it work?
Well, because I'd already had experiences in the jungle in Peru, and I'd self-administered here in the UK illegally, but I already had connections in the Peruvian jungle that were well established. It's perfectly legal in Peru. And they had long established businesses that are registered, and they're vastly experienced individuals and teams. And so I didn't really need to build anything other than my role was basically convincing people that it was viable and safe and effective. That was my role. I didn't have to actually build out the therapy or the venues for the therapy. It already existed. I just needed to convince people that it was worth a shot. And yeah, so it's in regards to operations, it's relatively simple. The problem comes is the powers that be letting us operate, and that's where problems came in. But we're still operating, and we're growing and growing and growing pretty fast. So it's all gone very well, I have to say. Not without trouble, no.
Yeah, I mean, people see the result of probably 5 years of trouble, to get to here. Starting a business is tough. Like, it is probably the most difficult, most fulfilling experience I've been through, but the most difficult, I would say. Then factor that into actual like societal change, and you probably downplay the operational side a little bit. I imagine it probably wasn't that easy, but in comparison to actually, changing people's perspectives from this psychedelic being people taking mushrooms on a park to actually it being a legitimate like therapy. How have you gone about? Because business is hard. Is bloody hard, even harder to get people to kind of change their mindset. How have you done that?
Well, firstly, I'd agree with you, the difficulty of it. Actually, I found starting businesses, I suffered a lot from my experiences of Afghanistan, but fortunately, psychedelics have helped me overcome all of those issues. But starting particularly two businesses, Heroic Hearts being one of them, took me to the darkest place I've been to in terms of, I fell into a depression, a significant depression. And so, yeah, it's very, very difficult, very hard work, very demanding work. And then on top of that, as you say, you've got this, my team and I are trying to create societal change, policy change. And that has been very tough. And the way that we've gone around it really is that a lot of the time is just sharing your experience and being very honest that it's difficult. It's very difficult, but also the level of, let's say, healing, the level of healing that has potential from these experiences is significant and could be total in some cases. And by total, I want to be very precise with my language here. Let's say I went to the jungle. Let's say you go to the jungle. You come to Heroic Hearts and you say, I've got this particular problem and I want to go to do ayahuasca, let's say. But it's a very particular problem. And let's say it's Afghanistan. There's combat trauma and I want to go and deal with that. But we recognize that there's loads of other stuff in your life that has been difficult as well. But you come to us and you go in front of that, the medicine, with that sole intention, you're not going to get everything resolved at the click of your fingers. It's just, I want to resolve my combat trauma. There's a high percentage chance that can happen. But it doesn't mean that your life is going to be, you're going to turn into some enlightened being, like Buddha or Jesus Christ or something like that. It's just, you're going to have one part of your history and your character potentially resolved. And that's important to note. I went there and resolved my combat trauma, but there were still other issues that I have to address because life is difficult. And so it's not everything in the world is resolved by the use of psychedelics. It's just that you can approach psychedelics with a specific issue, and there's a high percentage chance that it will be significantly improved. And for me, it was completely resolved. And so I think that's the best way to convince people. And that, I'm not the only one, not by a long stretch. And now we've got a backlog, not a backlog, we've got a growing group of our beneficiaries that provide their own testimonies and among their own communities, but then online as well. And they might play part of a small documentary, or they just talk to their families, but that ripple effect spreads out, and that is how we're approaching our policy of change. In addition to, we're trying to play a role in drug policy reform in the UK, but that's a different animal. But in terms of stigma among our own community, our own stories are doing just fine with that. It's a slower process, but it's a more effective process.
And is it still illegal in the UK?
Certainly.
Is it illegal in the US? Because I feel like the US is a little bit further ahead in terms of this.
They are a little bit further ahead. So psilocybin is legal in certain states, just a few, or a couple. I think Oregon being one, Colorado I think being the other one. I should know this. Oregon for sure. Ayahuasca, there are churches. There's one particular church that's been established in last year. So I would say ayahuasca is still illegal federally across the United States. However, you could access it through these churches, and one of them is in advanced talks about operating legally in the US. There are obviously illegal ones, underground ones, but there is one that is making significant advances in operating legally, which is very exciting. But essentially, ayahuasca is absolutely illegal in the US.
Yeah, it's so interesting as well, because there is so much evidence that thousands of years ago it was the norm in society, and it's kind of been pushed towards this. It's on the same level as any sort of drug. I don't know what listed drug is it? Is it?
It's Schedule 1 class.
Is it?
It's in the worst category. Yeah. Let's say the most restricted categories. And like I say, we're trying to play our role in changing that, but that's going to be a long road. MDMA, which is it's a man-made substance. It's a laboratory substance. Ecstasy, that has just been denied federal rollout in the United States, which didn't come as a surprise, but is still really, really very disappointing considering the data of how effective MDMA can be to treat PTSD. It's incredibly effective. And so we thought that was going to be, that's coming down the road, but the can has been kicked down the road instead of it coming down the road faster, which is a shame. But psilocybin is already legal in certain states, and Heroic Hearts operating in the United States is already providing veterans retreats, legal veterans retreats in Oregon with psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms.
And what's the kind of look at like traditional therapies versus alternative therapies? What's the success rate? What's the data around? You know, to, people. I say cured is absolutely the wrong word, but people who solve that one portion of their trauma, like versus the alternative therapies, is the data around that?
That's hard because they wouldn't the way that you would record traditional methodologies, they wouldn't ever use the word healing anyway, because talking therapies, you cannot ever use the word healing because they know that it doesn't heal, and that isn't my opinion. That comes from psychiatrists. They understand it doesn't heal. It's just a management tool, and it helps. It can help, but it doesn't heal. So you wouldn't ever be able to measure that because the people providing that therapy themselves don't believe that it heals. They wouldn't use that word. And let's say SSRIs is another traditional method. They don't heal either. The way that if I use an image, the way that SSRIs work, the way that I explain it, is basically if you have a problem here, my fist beside my head, this is a problem. This is a psychological, emotional problem. And what we tend to do with our problems is this.
That's definitely what I do, by the way, with my problems. Kind of put it in a little box.
Yeah, and
ignore it. Yeah,
of course,
100%.
Of course, and I'm no different. I believe I've made progress, but I still absolutely do it. The trick is to recognise that you've done that and turn back to it. Okay, so you can turn your head away from it, and you can push it away. That's what we normally do, right? Psychedelics as an approach would do this.
Yeah.
And keep you there, looking at it.
Yeah.
And exploring it until it unfolds and hopefully dissipates, dissolves. SSRIs do this. So you're like,
yeah, it's kind of shield it.
Just block it. But when you come off of them, it's still there. It doesn't do anything about this.
Yeah.
It just blocks you from being able to perceive it or do anything about it, actually, because you're being numbed to a degree, which I think is some language that a lot of people use. It's like, I just feel numbed by the use of SSRIs. I know I did. And that's because, in a way, that's kind of literally what it's doing. It's just keeping you from the feelings, because the feelings are hard, the emotions are hard. And why psychedelics are so difficult is because you'll just go into those emotions.
Address it.
You just address it. And for a particular mindset, like mine, I welcome that. It's great. It's going to happen anyway, whatever your mindset. If you take a large enough dose of psychedelics, that's ultimately what's going to happen. But I actually welcome that because there's no hiding. But in a very healthy way. It's hard work, undeniably hard work, but it's done. All I can say is that it comes from a compassionate, kind and patient place. But it doesn't mean it's not going to be hard. To explore your trauma, it's going to be hard. But at the end, every chance that you will have made significant progress, which is a real blessing when you come out the other end of it.
I think it'd be scary for people.
It is. It's very daunting. That's our role as an organisation. My team's role is to prepare. And this, I think this needs to be addressed quite vocally, is that preparation for these types of medicines is vital. Not least because it's daunting, but because it's an abstract experience. You can't know what's going to happen, and I can't tell you what's going to happen either, because I don't know what's going to happen. Everything is totally subjective. But there's a way of preparing people that makes that experience a little easier to navigate. So preparation is important, but what's really very, very important is what you do after. The word for that is called integration in psychedelic work. And integration just means how you employ and apply everything that you've learned through the psychedelic experience in your waking life, in this world. What do you change? It's going to tell you that things need to change. It's going to show you that things need to change. But it's not going to change it for you. So you have to take responsibility, and that's our role as well, is to help all of our beneficiaries integrate their experience and hopefully go on to lead very fulfilling, meaningful lives free of a significant amount of trauma.
I think that is the scary bit. You've got no idea what it's going to uncover. Another question I was going to ask is, like, how do you know that experience is going to tackle that piece of trauma and not other things going on? But then you've kind of answered that around the preparation prior to going into that experience. Is that right?
Yeah. What I would say is,
I'm terrible. By the way, I'm terrible with this stuff, because this is like thinking about outer space. The way I think about it is like, if you go deep on, well, it's who bloody knows, like, what's out there really. And this is a similar kind of thing in the mind, in my opinion. It is just so abstract. It's so different. Like, how does that individual who's going to focus on this specific bit of trauma, actually, how does the brain hone in on that bit of trauma? And
so the way I would answer that, it's going to sound a little bit hippie-ish. I suppose in my heart, I am a hippie, despite how I'm dressed. The way I would answer that is that these medicines, these plants, this is my belief, okay? So this is just my belief. They are intelligent and should be treated as such. They are intelligent and alive, and so can be actively engaged with. You can ask, oh, can you help me with this? And you'll get an answer. But the answer might be, you don't need help with that. There's something further back up the chain of experiences that needs to be addressed. And then the things lower down the chain will be resolved naturally. And some people, let's say you go to the jungle and you want your combat trauma resolved. Actually, what you might find, so that's your intention, and your mind has perceived that it's the combat that's the problem. But actually, when you've consumed these medicines and you get in front of this medicine, you might become aware that it's actually your childhood that was the problem. And your childhood forced you into combat situations because it gave you meaning, or you wanted to conduct violence and you want to hurt people, or anything. You just wanted meaning or a sense of connection and community. But your childhood was the problem. The combat was unpleasant, but you might find it's the childhood that's the really bad bit. And once that's resolved, you can look back on, just an example, you can look back on something like Afghanistan and be like, yeah, it was bad, but actually, I am over that. But it was the childhood stuff that I wasn't over.
Do you think it's like a cup, and the Afghanistan stuff just spilled over the top of the
as
cup?
An example. So I'm not saying this is...
No, but I'm saying is it kind of like that intense experience, which is like the combat trauma, or the combat is just tipping you over the edge of like whatever it is previously in your life that...
Could be,
yeah.
So essentially what that boils down to is you get what you need, not what you want. So these medicines, because it's intelligent, they know what you actually need. Like, you need your childhood issues resolved. Whereas you go in saying, I want my combat issues resolved. So but ultimately, like you said, who knows? But there are ways that we can prepare people to just make that journey that little bit more easier and make them a little bit more knowledgeable. I think the RAFs, don't they say, as knowledge dispels fear, or at least the jump masters. I remember going to jump school and it was knowledge dispels fear above the door before you throw yourself out of a plane. And that's what we try to provide. This is what the environment's going to look like, whether it's the jungle or the Netherlands or Mexico. So the jungle itself can be quite intense.
Yeah.
So prepare yourself for the jungle. It's quite loud at night. And then This is what your accommodation will look like. This is what the ceremonial space looks like. These are the people that are going to be facilitating it. And generally speaking, psychedelics will have this sort of consequence.
Yeah.
So, but we can never say, you will experience this. You can never, ever say that. And anyone that does is avoid them.
Yeah. It's super interesting. I could keep asking you a million questions, and we haven't got an infinite amount of time. So before I move on, I've got one more question to ask you about the advice you'd give to people starting their own thing. I think that's a really an important one. But just before we finish off on that, who are the type of people that could benefit from Heroic Hearts? Because I think that's an important message to get out there now. So if anyone is listening and they're having a challenge.
Yeah, I think a great deal of people can benefit from psychedelics. There are red flags that in our vetting process, and I'm not going to share them because otherwise people would lie to make sure that they got access to it. We have red flags, but a great many people that are just struggling can certainly have access to psychedelics, and it would be safe and I believe effective. But there are people out there that I personally and us as an organisation don't believe should have access to psychedelics. But again, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah, I completely understand. Yeah.
Because they'd come to us and say, no, I haven't got any of those.
Yeah. I get it. All right, cool. So what advice would you give? Because that step change from JP Morgan to your own thing is a bloody big one. And I honestly, wholeheartedly believe that it is such a challenge to go and do something like that. What advice
would I give? Firstly, ask for help. Find people that are doing something of a similar scale to what you want to achieve. So where you see yourself, let's say, how do you see yourself as a success? Even though that will change in time. But from your starting position, what do you think success would look like? Find someone that looks like that. Doesn't have to be doing exactly what you've done, but find someone that's done something of similar note and ask them for help. Just contact them, ask them for help. LinkedIn's great for that. Or just your network. Just say it out loud. This is what I want to do. So just as a very brief example, while I was still at JP Morgan, I tried to build a theatre in Canning Town, which is where I was living. And building a theatre from scratch is a massive undertaking. I know nothing about building theatres or theatre or anything. I just knew that that's what so many of my friends are in theatre. I thought, I can do that. So I gave it a crack. And the more I said it out loud, the more people said, you know what, I can help you with that aspect of it. Or fundraising. A guy very kindly mentored me. He was raising 60 million. I just needed 1 million. And I was terrified at 1 million. He said, just relax, man. I'm raising 60 million. He's gone well over 60 million now for his raise of his organisation, which is internationally successful now. And he gave me all the time in the world. I'm very grateful to that man. But the thing is, say it out loud and ask people for help. Find who they are and ask them for help. It's very flattering to be asked for help, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, great advice. I for my business, I literally just incorporated a business when I was on paternity leave. I was like, I need to just start. If I do this is going to get me going, because there's always an excuse. You can always find an excuse not to do it.
Exactly.
Always.
And that will stem from fear.
Yeah, 100%.
And if we learn nothing from our military experiences, is that fear doesn't mean that you don't do something. That's why you have courage. Because no one's fearless. If anyone tries to tell you they're fearless, they're an idiot. And I believe I know, because I've been in some terrifying situations. And I was terrified. But it doesn't mean I don't do anything. And that's the same thing here. Just do it. Starting your own business is terrifying. I probably would rather get shot at than start another business, because it's incredibly difficult. But the rewards are just breathtaking.
Yeah.
But do it. Just do it. And know that it's not the end. If it fails, it's not the end. If it's a huge success, that's not the end either.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Have a bit of a caveat there. Make sure you've got a reasonable plan before you just do it. Like at least have something written on paper. It just needs to be one side of A4.
Yeah.
Just something to, just don't want someone just quitting the job because they're like, I fancy doing some sort of business.
Yeah.
No idea what.
Yeah. Well, you've got responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
You've got mortgage, you've got families, you've got kids, you've got to be responsible about it. And that is a long, prolonged process. But that people are here to help. Ask them.
Yeah.
And just do it.
Yeah, good advice. Okay, we're running out of time. I told you it'd go quickly. So what I want to finish on, what we finish on with every guest, are 3 actionable takeaways.
Yeah. So the first one, but I believe the most important one, you've got to forgive yourself. Right at the beginning of any decision, forgive yourself for all of your perceived mistakes up until this point. And I say perceived very intentionally because I don't really believe in mistakes. Just forgive yourself for any perceived mistakes. Forgive yourself for all of the doubt. Forgive yourself for not knowing what you're doing because you won't know what you're doing. Just forgive yourself and just do it. Do it anyway. And that is my second point, is do something. Just do something and understand that if it fails, it's not the end. If it's a success, it's not the end. These are just stepping stones. I thought the reg was the end for me. It wasn't the end. It was a stepping stone. I thought JP Morgan was. I was like, wow, I've got this amazing, well-paid job. Just career till I retire. 3 years gone. See you later. Tai Chi teacher. Yeah, I'm still going, but it's a stepping stone. And success doesn't mean it's the end. There'll just be something else after it. So just do it. Whatever it is, do it and forgive yourself if it fails. Because I've failed more than most. You just keep going. Just do it again. Just do something else. And you will learn, and the skills that you build from that will make you appropriate for the next thing that's waiting for you down your path.
Yeah.
And then the third one, I've already said it, ask for help. Find people that have done something of similar stature in a similar realm. Go out there and ask them for help. Buy them a cup of tea. Sit down in front of them and let them tell you how they did it. Ask them anything you want. It's flattering. You're not bothering them. And if you are bothering them, then don't worry about it. Ask someone else. It's flattering to be asked for help. Ask.
People are willing as well.
Yeah, more than willing. It's flattering to be asked. So do it. Don't worry about, I don't want to bother that person. Wow, he's so successful. I don't want to bother that person. Just go. Doesn't matter if they're the CEO of JP Morgan or something. If you can get in front of them, ask them.
Yeah. Amazing advice. Well, Keith, thank you very much for your time. I could have gone for another hour and a half. I could have gone deeper on the subject. I think it's important to say now, closing out, that for anyone who thinks they could benefit from Heroic Hearts, to get in touch with on the website or directly to you? Or?
Through the website, there's an application form you can apply, and just have a little read, see if it resonates with you, and apply. You'll join the waiting list, and then when we get a retreat booked, we'll email everyone on our waiting list to say, this one's coming up. Do you want to be considered for the vetting process?
Cool. Amazing. Thank you very much, Keith.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe on Spotify or Apple, leave us a 5-star review, and join the Redeployable community. Thanks.